Sean Haney here with RealAgriculture.com and Real Ag Radio that you can hear every weekday at 4:30 Eastern on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM, or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm joined right now by Al Mussell. He is Research Director with the Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute, better known as CAPI. Al, how are we doing today?
Well, Sean, thanks very much for having me.
Yeah, I always enjoy our chats. New report out from CAPI. These are always interesting reports to dive into. It's entitled The Canadian Agri-Food Resilience, a Toolbox for Managing Crisis. So, Al, I guess first, what kind of crises are we talking about?
Well, crises are, I'll call it not small problems. The kind of things that are overwhelming, could be disastrous. Not the, maybe I'll respond in this way, Sean. Not the sort of frictional risks that we are, I think, pretty well accustomed to dealing with in agriculture. Your market risks, most kinds of weather risks, disease risks, which are, somewhat individualized to the producer, let's say. We can handle those pretty well. Crises happen when you've got one risk that is, let's say a really large event that spills over into a bunch of other things and affects multiple levels simultaneously.
Historically, is Canada good at managing crises?
That's a great question. I'm not sure I'm qualified to answer that. I mean, the big one sort of that comes to mind in my career is BSE, and obviously with some focus on Alberta, but of course a national event. And I'm going to say that that was one that we recognized the severity of it pretty quickly, and we acted very quickly to contain it. I mean, still, it's changed the face of the cattle industry forever and the beef industry. But I'm going to say that we probably actually managed that one pretty well, all things considered.
Al, what does your report recommend in this toolbox that we do differently than we have in the past?
Yeah, so we don't really have a set of tools. Whether you want to look at our BRM suite, you want to look at agri-recovery. It doesn't really contemplate this problem of converging crises where you got a big problem that sort of spills over and leads to a whole bunch of other things. And it's kind of, you thought that the risk that you had on the table was X, and then that converges into something much larger than X, and like, gosh, how did we get to this place? I'll give you an example that may be intuitive to some of your listeners, Sean, and this comes from a very credible source. I was watching the Today Show on NBC a few weeks ago, and
Al, you know what? I'm surprised. I thought you were more of a View sort of guy, but I guess we'll stick with the Today Show.
Maybe I need to start into the View. But they're so I turn on the TV, and they're interviewing this couple that lives in Florida. And they're talking about how their insurance company has canceled their property insurance coverage. And they go on and say, well, actually, if I understand this correctly, all of the big insurance companies have abandoned the Florida market for property insurance. Now, you can imagine that's a massive financial issue. Now, apparently the state of Florida operates sort of a state-run property insurance that you can't be denied for. But, and of course, the rationale for this is hurricanes and the prospect that the hurricanes are becoming more frequent, more severe, and insurance companies are sort of saying, look, how do we offer insurance for this marketplace and either make it affordable for people or manage to provide the coverage that's meaningful? Can't do it. Okay, we're out of here. And my understanding from the story in the Today Show is that's exactly what's happened. But you can see how something like that, what's a rational reaction? People say, well, look, I can't get proper insurance for my property in Florida. Guess what? I'm leaving Florida. So you start to see property being liquidated. What happens then? Prices start to go down. Other people say, well, hang on, all of my wealth is tied up in my property, my home, etc. I'm out of here too. And you begin to see how, that's a sort of an extreme weather plows into an insurance crisis, which then leads to a financial crisis. And of course, when you're looking at the finances in the United States, Florida is not a small part. It's significant. These are, and that's one that's occurring in real time. You bring it back to our context in agriculture. It's not a real big stretch to say that, I'm not saying this will happen, but using my imagination, could happen with crop insurance, right?
Mm.
You've got certain areas where crop insurance, like, what's holding up your land values? Well, it's crop insurance. If we get a sequence of years, very bad years, and you go back and say, well, look, we have to run crop insurance and BRM instruments like it in a certain way. It's got to be profitable. It's got to have premium levels that are affordable for people, and it has to have meaningful coverage for them. If we can't, manage to meet those three conditions, then we can't offer this. And this then spills over into a bunch of other things that are in principle unanticipated by a problem with insurance, which many people would view as kind of a technical financial issue.
In the report, Al, one of the points made, I was going to say criticisms, but I'm not sure that's exactly fair, but just points of significance. And it's key takeaway point number one, actually. Maybe I should have started there. The lack of a long-term vision for the Canadian agri-food sector constrains effective research, strategy, and analysis. So is the idea there that because we don't actually have a long-term vision of what we're actually striving for, it's really hard to know what potential roadblocks are in front of us, to know what some of our reactive strategies need to be to some of those roadblocks? Is that what's at play here? Or what do you mean by that?
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. Another aspect is how the pieces connect together and the assumptions that you make about them.
Oh,
So for example, we have a BRM program suite, which, I might add, I think for the most part has actually worked pretty well for us. But it's sort of assuming that perils will come, people will suffer, but within the course of about 3 years, this will basically correct itself back to normal. So either if it's you as an individual that have had an isolated event that you have to deal with, we can get you back on your feet again and more or less back to normal within 3 years. Because after 3 years, of course, if we're talking about agri stability, you start to lose your reference margin, right? Similarly with market conditions, so we can have a bad year, but we're not going to have 3 bad years in a row, such that we start to lose our reference. These are the assumptions that work into the program, and for the most part, that's worked out okay. But when you start to think about a world where we have a bunch of new perils that we're not accustomed to thinking about, so extreme weather is one of them. The decline of the multilateral rules-based trade system and the geopolitical, perhaps willingness to use food as a weapon that go with that. Some of the other sort of big picture sweeping changes that we face today. It's not as clear that 3-year window or even a 5-year window really is enough to think through what happens, because the reality is we like to think of the world, and I'll be honest with you, economists are among the worst of them, is everything, we have a disturbance and then it reverts back to the average situation, and that's what we're always doing. We're always sort of bringing things back to this long-term average. We correct for these disturbances. But actually, when you deal with some of these potentially big, ugly disruptions, you never get back to the average. It's sort of a dynamic in which things can sort of spin out of control, and you may get to some new stable point, but it's not the one you're at before. And again, thankfully, we haven't seen that, but I worry that we may have been lucky.
okay. So of the 5 key takeaways. You just made me think of point number 5. Okay, I'm just going to read it out and I want you to comment on it.
Sure.
Agri-food policy in Canada has typically seen supply chain vulnerabilities as a transactional event or as transactional events that can be contained and managed within the impacted value chain. This is inconsistent with the risks of converging crises and the unique role of the food supply chain, and there is an opportunity and need to move beyond existing approaches. Talk about that point.
Right, sure. So let me just give you an example. So you have a crisis in the pig industry, big picture crisis. Well, it could be African swine fever. African swine fever, and I think everybody at least connected to the swine industry is aware that this is like an existential threat. Okay, so this could change if we were to have that occur with us, then that could change structurally and probably almost permanently the size and scope of the pig industry in Canada. However, there's supply segments that are connected to that. So your feed grain segment, for example. How does this begin to affect the basis in different parts of the country? Could be barley, could be wheat shorts, could be corn. How does it begin to affect that marketplace? Then in turn, how does this affect the choice of crops that we grow going forward in the future if we don't have a feed market from pigs? There's this sense that we always have that, there's a animal disease, it's a bad animal disease, but we're going to pour the resources in there and we're going to get that corrected. And everybody is, there's going to be some bad hurt, but ultimately we're going to make everybody whole and we'll more or less return back to the way that we were. I don't think African swine fever shapes up that way. And there's a number of other perils in the world that don't either.
I don't know if your scope of your work here look beyond our borders, but are we just like other countries in this regard, or are we actually better than others, although we have some critiques, or are we really, really a laggard here when it comes to our preparedness for these sorts of issues?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm quite qualified to answer the question, Sean. Let's take a look at the U.S. In their ag policy programming suite, this is primarily commodity based. It's evolved a bit. Now we have. I guess I need to update that a little bit. We've got all kinds of money for sustainable agriculture. We got money for small packing plants. We got lots on the table that is different than what we've had historically. But if you look at sort of the real wheelhouse on the U.S. ag programming suite, it's commodity based programming. So you're trying to use deficiency payments to put a floor on the producer's returns from those individual crops. Does it deal with situations like this? I'm going to say no. It probably deals real well with well. I should maybe paraphrase that a little bit. It's still commodity-based ag policy, which is generally harmful to us, so we don't appreciate that part much. But it's a little bit like our ag policy, our BRM suite, in the sense that it deals, I think, pretty well with let's say the 5% deviation, the 8% deviation in terms of getting people been knocked down, you get them stood back up on their feet and help them back, and in a short period of time, they're more or less back to normal. That's the 5 to 8% hit. The 30% hit, I don't think we have a solution for.
My estimation here, my guess is that if we were coming up with the toolbox and thinking about this visionary kind of plan for where we're going and all the different barriers and the possibilities that will stand in front of us or create this chaos in what we're trying to accomplish. If you were doing that for the airline sector, or you were doing it for the auto sector, it's a lot easier. One of the challenges we have is that there's so much diversity in our sector from a production standpoint, size of producer, type of commodities produced, end use markets, that that diversity creates this level of complexity that really prevents us from actually figuring our stuff out to move forward together on some sort of plan and putting this toolbox together. Is that fair and accurate?
Yeah, I think it's a good observation, Sean. Yeah, I mean the thing that I'll add to that is, um, farmers are used to struggle, and they struggle. Um, the auto sector, the airlines, I think they're not making any money. They kind of quit. And okay, so the service stops, the product flow stops. Farmers are different. They don't. They struggle to try and adapt. They try to keep going and hopefully don't go broke in the process, but that happens too. So in a strange way, I think that maybe makes it more difficult. But yeah, it's just it's so interconnected. You're dealing with biology, you're dealing with economics, you're dealing with finance, you're dealing with international relationships, treaties, trade policy, all that kind of thing.
Al, great stuff. If somebody wants access to the report, go to the CAPI website.
Yes, absolutely. It's there.
Okay, so that is CAPI-ICPA.ca. So just type in
Correct.
CAPI and Al Mussell, and it's bound to show up for sure. Hey, Al, thanks for joining us so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Sean.